Information architecture. Information architecture is the structural design of shared information environments. The art and science of organizing and labeling websites, intranets, online communities, and software to support usability and findability. These activities include library systems and database development. Let us see the process for creating an effective information architecture. Understand the business or contextual requirements and the proposed content for the system. Read all existing documentation. Interview stakeholders and conduct a content inventory. Conduct cart sorting exercises with a number of representative users. Develop a draft information architecture, that is, information groupings and hierarchy. Evaluate the draft information architecture using the card-based classification evaluation technique. Story. To say what something means to say. How it is related or connected to something else. To ask the meaning of an event. To ask how it contributed to the story in which it occurs. It is the connections or relations between events. Narrative meaning is created by establishing that is a part of a whole and usually that the cause of something else. It is usually combined with human actions or events that affects human beings. Stories fill our lives in the way that water fills the lives of fish. Stories are so all-pervasive that we practically cease to be aware of them. Environment. The products of our narrative schemes are ubiquitous in our lives. They fill our cultural and social environment. Descriptions. We create narrative descriptions for ourselves and for others about our own past actions. We develop storied accounts that give sense to the behavior of others. Decisions. We also use the narrative scheme to inform our decisions by constructing imaginative what-if scenarios on the receiving end. We are constantly confronted with stories during our conversations and encounters with the written and visual media. We are told fairy tales as children and read and discussed these stories in school. Meaning. Meaning is a social phenomenon. Meaning is produced not only by individuals but by groups, communities, societies, and cultures. This is maintained through language and understandings, knowledge of the connections between signifying sounds and signifying events. Network. Groups, communities, societies, and cultures also preserve collections of typical narrative meanings in their midst. Fairy tales, legends, histories, and stories. To participate in a group, community, society, or culture requires a general knowledge of these accumulated narrative meanings. The cultural stocks of meanings are dynamic and are added by new contributions from members and deleted by lack of use. Connections. Narrative meaning is about connections. It links individual human actions and events into interrelated aspects of an understandable composite. Narrative displays the significance that events have for one another. The anti-story makes explicit that they do not have causal connections between each other. Flow chart. A flow chart is a formalized graphic representation of a logic sequence, work, or manufacturing process, organization chart, or similar formalized structure. The purpose of a flow chart is to provide people with a common language or reference point when dealing with the project or process. Flowcharts use simple geometric symbols and arrows to define relationships. The flowchart or navigation map is a visual representation of the sequence and flow of your entire multimedia program. It outlines the structure of the program, showing all of the screens and the connections from each screen to the others. It is useful for organizing and clearly seeing how everything in your program will fit together. It allows you to make decisions on the sequence you want your learners to take through the program. A flowchart is similar to a storyboard, except that it doesn't provide precise details as to the content of the individual screens. With a navigation map, you can see all the possible user interaction pathways and connections. It is expressed through labeled boxes and directional arrows. It traces them through the hierarchical menu structures and along various screen branches. It provides the logical design from which the much more detailed storyboards will naturally flow. A well-constructed flowchart, considering all relevant criteria, will save you from having to restructure things over and over if you realize that the components of your program are not fitting together like you had hoped. Now, the production flowchart is different from the instructional analysis flowchart you created earlier. Don't get those two mixed up. They serve two completely different functions. The instructional analysis was created to indicate the flow of steps and sub-steps required to achieve your goal. The navigation map is a visual representation of the layout of your multimedia program. It occurs from the opening screen to the closing screen. It also shows the various relationships between all of your screens. Here's an example of navigation map for a multimedia program that deals with the wars of the 20th century. Notice how there is a title screen, a main menu page, an overview, several topics, and a conclusion screen. Each of the main topic screens leads to several subtopic screens. Also, each of the topics has a practice and feedback section. The help and glossary screens are accessible from any of the topic screens. This flowchart does not describe any graphics or animations on any of the screens. That's what you will do on the storyboards. All the flowchart does is providing you with a big picture overview of the entire multimedia program and a good idea of how everything will fit together. It also gives you a general idea of how many screens of instruction you will have to develop. There are several ways to structure the information in your program. Here are some of the more common methods used. Linear structure. The web user navigates sequentially, moving from one screen to the next. The linear approach is appropriate when you want the user to visit. Each page is lined sequentially without skipping around. Hierarchical structure. This layout usually begins with a master page or home page. This page usually has links that lead to related or subordinate pages. These pages in turn contain links back to the home page. Non-linear structure. Web users can navigate freely through the content of the web project. It is unbound by predetermined routes. The example given, that is, wars of the 20th century, would thus be considered a hierarchical structure. It could be a composite structure if the subtopics under each of the main topics were arranged in a linear fashion. The main point is that there are many ways to structure the information in your program. It is up to you to decide on the way that will most effectively lead your learners to the achievement of your goal. Does the information in your program need to be assessed in a specific order, or can it be assessed non-sequentially? Program. In programming, for instance, the beginning or end of a program is represented by an oval. Process. A process is represented by a rectangle, a decision is represented by a diamond, and an input-output process is represented by a parallelogram. The internet is represented by a cloud. Scraper site. A scraper site is a website that features content stolen from other sites and presented as original. Scraper sites copy valuable content from legitimate websites and republish it on their own sites. Programming. Terms related to software programming, including definitions about programming languages, words and phrases, software design, coding, testing, and debugging. Internet applications. This whatis.com glossary contains terms related to Internet applications including definitions about software. Simply scripts. Links to hundreds of downloadable scripts, movie scripts, screenplays, and transcripts of current, classic, and maybe a few soon-to-be released movies, television, animation, unproduced, and radio shows. Script category, a screenwriter's resource. Welcome to the Daily Script, a collection of movie scripts, screenplays to serve as a resource for writers and actors and who simply enjoy reading movie scripts. The movie scripts are presented in proper script format and where possible multiple drafts are presented. Link. These are for educational purposes only. If you cannot find what you are looking for, please visit the links section under downloadable movie scripts. Storyboard. A multimedia storyboard is a communication tool. It is used by multimedia designers to map out and organize their project ideas. It happens before actually developing their program. Storyboarding refers to the process of creating a sequence of screens to provide an overview of the project. It demonstrates the arrangement and functionality of the program elements. It also helps to delineate the program's navigation scheme. In other words, storyboards allow you to visualize how the final product is going to look and operate. It also paves way for ensuring that no vital information is left out during the development process. In addition, problems can be spotted on the storyboard. It can be corrected before the final program is developed. If the program is going to be interactive, the storyboard is useful in determining when and where user input can or should happen. Finally, if more than one person is working on the project, storyboards provide a framework that everyone can point to as a common point of reference. Once a concept or script is written for a film or animation, the next step is to make a storyboard. A storyboard visually tells the story of an animation, panel by panel, kind of like a comic book. Your storyboard should convey some of the following information. What characters are in the frame, how they are moving, what are the characters saying to each other if anything. Why make a storyboard? Creating a storyboard will help you to plan your animation shot by shot. You can make changes to your storyboard before you start animating instead of changing your mind later. Show your storyboard to other people to get feedback on your ideas. Pre-production documentations. Take responsibility for pre-production of a production taking place in connection with another unit. Prepare pre-production documentation for this media production. You will identify requirements for the production and source of requirements to create documentation. Source requirements carry out production. Write a report evaluating their pre-production work in the light of the production experience. This unit is designed to introduce you to the pre-production process so that you understand the importance of careful preparation for successful production and post-production. You will also need to learn and follow the established codes of professional practice. The pre-production process requires you to use documentation to record your investigations or your planning. There are a range of pre-production document templates for this work as well as free software such as Celltex, which you are encouraged to use. Flowcharts are an excellent tool to show complex ideas in a visually pleasing and easy to understand manner. Create leaves, wireframes, and mockups helps you to draw at the speed of thought. Visualize your ideas naturally with ease. UML diagrams are great for designing and documenting systems. UML Smart Objects with Power features helps you to draw faster and support 14 types of UML diagrams. Network topology diagrams, Cisco diagrams, data center diagrams, and more. Check out network diagram examples to see the power of Creately. Planning and scheduling is easier with Creately Gantt charts. It is even easier than drawing a timeline on a whiteboard. Specially designed graphic organizer, templates for K-12 education, multiple types of diagrams and examples to suit most classroom needs. Flexibility of creating beautiful charts while being able to add another diagram elements makes Creately a great fit for composing infographics. Detailed database design diagrams with table structures, relationships and key identifiers are as easy as typing in a schema. Create your diagrams with minimal drawing time. Quickly create Venn diagrams and Euler diagrams with easy-to-use web-based tools. Draw process flows naturally and use the Smart Object properties to customize BPN 2.0 objects to match your exact needs. Dozens of SWOT chart templates to choose from to suit your exact needs. Customize as you need and collaborate with others in planning. Interactive flowcharts and storyboards. Each storyboard typically describes all of the elements appearing on a single screen: instructional text, graphics, animations, etc. It also enlists how those elements will be arranged on the screen and how that screen will link to others. While creating storyboards, it is simple to rearrange the elements of each screen to better fit the instructional strategy. One of the three main constituents of any enterprise is the control and information architecture. The rest are production facilities, people, and organization. The control and information architecture in big organizations can be complicated. Therefore, to facilitate the perception, study, and analysis of this architecture, the creation of diagrams which describe it in the form of graphical schemes is worthwhile. As a rule, the control and information architecture diagrams (CIAD) present the diagram series, where each subsequent diagram has the higher degree of the detail elaboration. On the first level, the general philosophy of the control and information architecture in the organization is described. Further, there can be created network diagrams presenting physical structure of data processing. It occurs in organization and diagrams of entities showing the logic of data processing. The purpose of CIAD is to present in the form of graphical schemes all objects in the organization. It processes data and connections between them, and also to denote the direction and consequence of data processing. CIAD show these processes analogously to process flow diagrams, PFD, and similarly to PFD, they are created on the projection stage. On creation of CIAD, the following should be considered. On the diagram, there should be presented all main calculating systems and objects, which process data and lines of connections and form the organization data network. Lines of connections should differ in thickness and color depending on the carrying capacity. The description of the level of detailed elaboration which is described in the diagram should be presented. Additional systems do not displayed on the diagram but can be mentioned in it. With the development of technologies and computer networks, the new kind of CIAD has appeared. More detailed CIAD began to present control and information network diagram, but they are built on the level of servers and include the same elements as CIAD, and besides they include all the main calculating servers, indications of speeds of connections line and connections protocols, indications of all commutating devices, additional calculating systems. Once you have a comprehensive design document, it is often tempting to dive into your authoring software and begin creating screens. After all, you have thoroughly planned your instruction and are ready to begin developing your program, right? That may be correct. However, there's one more bit of planning that will help you to make your development process to go much smoother. Before firing up the authoring program, you need to spend a little time planning. It includes how you will structure your instructional materials and how your learners will interact with that instruction. Flowcharts and storyboards. In the first step of your instructional strategy, you sequenced and clustered your objectives. It also says that you went on to determine the instructional material that would best fit each of your objectives. Now it's time to think about how your users will interact with that information within your multimedia program. First, you will create a flowchart that indicates the flow of your program. Then you will create storyboards for each of your main screens. As you go through this process, keep in mind Gagney's 9 events of instruction. Use them to help guide the sequence of events in your program. If you recall, the 9 events are gaining attention, informing learner of objectives, stimulating recall of prior learning, presenting the stimulus material, providing learning guidance, eliciting the performance, providing feedback about performance correctness, assessing the performance, enhancing retention and transfer. Examples and case studies. The 9 events might not necessarily correspond to the number of screens in your program. It is a given screen might incorporate one or more than one of 9 events. For example, in the example given earlier on Wars of the 20th Century, the first event might take place on the title screen and might involve an animation or video to get the learner's attention. Events 2 and 3 might take place on the overview screen. Events 4 and 7 would take place on the various topic and subtopic screens, in addition to the help and glossary screens. Event 8 would take place outside of the program and might involve a paper and a pencil test. Finally, Event 9 would likely to take place on the conclusion screen. Step 1. Flowchart. Create a flowchart that indicates the sequence and flow of your multimedia program. There is no standard way to go about doing this, but your flowchart should indicate all of your major screens and connections from each screen to the others. Think about the major sections you will have in your program. Then think about any extra sections you might have that do not logically flow from your strategy. You may want to add a help section or a reference section. These don't necessarily relate directly to your goals and objectives, but it may be things you want to include in your program for the benefit of the learners. Also, number each box in your flowchart. You will use that number later to match each box with a storyboard. Use any means you wish to create the flowchart. If you create your flowchart in a program other than Word, you will need to insert the completed flowchart into the storyboard documents. Step 2. Storyboards. Once you have a flowchart, create a storyboard for each of the major screens or events in your program. The storyboard should show the general screen layout and indicate where each element you want to use on that screen will be positioned. You do not need to create a storyboard every time something minor happens on a screen. For example, you don't need to create a storyboard just to show a mouse over effect or something flying across the screen. In fact, animations can be indicated using arrows and other annotations within your screen sketches. However, if you got something major happening on a screen, you should probably have a storyboard to document it. This means that you will likely to have a storyboard corresponding to each box in your flowchart. The provided storyboard template for you to use when creating your storyboards.